Hi again, everyone. Welcome to episode 47, part 2 of Genn and Millie. We're a Gen Xer and Millennial, talk about the Enneagram and all the things that Allison does not understand. I just think it's important that we note that I literally did not read this accurately.
Yep. Yeah, that's interesting.
I think that is really important to note that I truly did.
And I would say, that also is that report. That's that interpretation of identifying your core type Enneagram. Okay, so quick pause. This is part 2 of a 2-part of episode 47. So
listen
if you
in.
have not listened to the first part, I would say go back and listen to that if you're curious. We did a dive into the Enneagram structure, a little bit of what it looks like, what a core type looks like, what a wing means, what integration, disintegration, stress, security looks like, and a little bit of foreshadowing to talking about this. So if you haven't listened to that, pause and go back.
Right.
Listen to that if you're curious.
That's like the
It's the context.
prerequisite.
Yes.
For
prereq course for the 201
for the 201 course of I still don't understand this. Okay.
Which is okay. Which is like
That's
glad we're diving
so
into
okay.
it.
This what I really appreciate about this in strengths language is the fact that this is your learner teaching and this is my input absorbing, and I am struggling to absorb without all my questions being answered.
Yeah.
But you're a very, very patient teacher.
I'm trying. Are there any questions I haven't answered yet?
No, I think that you've answered them. But starting with you're a 2 and not a 1, I also think that I came into this, and let's just own this honestly, with some bad attitude and negative perception about it. So I just went to, of course I'm a strict perfectionist, and look at this language.
Yep. It's so negative, right? Yeah. So
but now I'm glad to know that I'm a considerate helper.
Considerate helper, which is definitely the kindest, I think, of all of the labels of the numbers or the terms of the numbers. And it's also actually why this is the most misidentified number, especially within the female population.
Makes sense.
Especially because the Enneagram has a lot of Christian ties and heritage. So there's this idea of this is what a Christian female has to look like, right? And so actually it's funny, and I think it's, I guess, interesting that you're probably you're hearing about, if you're listening to this and haven't really known about the Enneagram, that you're hearing it from me, because the 8 females are probably the most negatively viewed and get the baddest rap on the Enneagram.
Absolutely, I bet.
Because they push a lot of gender norm boundaries in our patriarchal culture sitting in the United States of America, right? So, and there haven't been a lot of sounds a lot like me, which sounds also a lot like an 8, right? Like pushing boundaries. So, so we wanted to, for this episode, talk a little bit. We queued up as much as possible, or as much as we wanted to, kind of the intro of it, to talk really concrete examples of what this looks like. So it can be complementary. I do want to reiterate that we're definitely not saying everyone go out and figure out your type, right? Like this is for people who really want to do additional investment, who are curious about it, who've heard about it and are like, what the heck, who are maybe going to counseling and want to integrate this into some of their own personal healing, as it is a little more abstract, but also a lot more negative than strengths language. So I'm going to do a little bit of an overview of all of the 9 types to give us a little bit of just context to this. I think I'm going to use this. So I'm using a book, which is called The Path Between Us by Suzanne Stabile, who is probably the leading Enneagram expert. She's been doing it probably the longest out of most people that are talking about it, besides like Father Richard Rohr, maybe, who's a very commonly cited Enneagram person. And so this book specifically is not her introduction to the Enneagram. This is all about actually relationships between numbers and Enneagrams in relationship. But she has a really good one she actually co-wrote with Ian Cron, who is the guy who created the assessment that I had you take. And that's called The Road Back to You, which is all about claiming that core type, and that's definitely probably one of the best introductory books. I also highly recommend The Sacred Enneagram, which is by Chris Hewerts. He actually lives in Omaha, and this is who I did the workshop with, and he is very much more on the spirituality side. Suzanne Stabile and Ian Cron are as well, but not as much into Chris Hewerts is more of a mysticist. He's more into the kind of mystic theology within the Christian theological realm, but he's a little more like, you might really enjoy this interpretation of it, Allie, based on understanding your kind of faith and life concept framework. I enjoy these guys a little bit more, because they're a little more traditionalist. So essentially, I'm going to talk a little bit about the core numbers, because we all have a core type, and then describe those a bit, and then we're going to dig into examples of Allie's number and my number and how they relate to our strengths, how they complement, but also how they can conflict sometimes. So the ones, they're all numbered based on the 1 to 9 kind of diagram. The ones often are called the Perfectionist, is a name for them, which is the one that you thought and you were looking at. I'm also trying to look for,
and I think I do have. That's a wing, correct? And I think that probably
comes out.
For sure comes out, especially this time of year.
Yep, definitely. So I was going to look very quickly to see if I can find in this book. Chris actually does a whole chart of all of the different names that have been associated with each of the numbers, which I think is helpful. I don't know if I'll be able to find it at a quick pass through because he has so many charts, but maybe I'll get to it. So I might throw out some other names for these that I have heard, but essentially there's a couple different veins of theory and thought behind the Enneagram, which is why there's a lot of variance in how it's taught and what people say are the best practices, because it comes from several different traditions. So there's kind of a certain traditions which are a little maybe more traditional, more associated with Christianity. There's a whole wing of the Enneagram that's associated with Native spirituality, Native American and First Nation spirituality. So there's a lot of different interpretations of it. But ones on this diagram are called the Perfectionists. They are a little bit, or they always kind of want things to look great, want to a little bit be perfect, want to have a perfect display, not only externally but internally. So what I've heard is that they have kind of an inner critic that's always speaking to them, right? That things need to be better, this needs to be better. It's less because you're measuring against someone or something else, but more internally, that you always have to make things better. So I'm going to quote from, again, The Path Between Us, Suzanne Stabile. I want to make sure I give credit to her. She said, ones have a hard time believing that they're good enough or worthy because of a constant inner voice that faults everything they do. So they often settle for being right or correct. So that's kind of the one. The two are the helpers, are also called the givers. So, and this is Allie's type. There's a lot of needing to be needed. Mm-hmm. So there's this desire to feel needed, and choose. It's not only just feeling to be needed, but it's because you see the needs of other people. Really in tune, like I mentioned, it's part of the heart triad, so really in tune emotionally with the needs of other people. The term that is often associated with this is empathy. So which is kind of funny, you have empathy in your top 5. My best friend Alex, who's a type 2, empathy's her number 1 strength. And so oftentimes there's a lot of association between those. So they give often at the expense of their own self. So give more and more and try to fix things and try and meet the needs until it eventually becomes they lose all sense of what their own needs are, right? So the 3s are called the performers, and they like to be successful. Oftentimes are driven by status or kind of external views of success. So they're really good at a little bit, sometimes what's associated with them is they put on a little bit of like a mask sometimes. Mm-hmm. They know who they need to portray in any given situation, or who they need to become in any given situation based on the audience or the need within that context. I do not know personally any self-identified 3s. I've listened to a great podcast I listened to is That Sounds Fun with Annie F. Downs, and she actually did an awesome series this whole summer where for each Enneagram type she invited a male and a female of each type to describe and answer a ton of great questions about their type. And that was really helpful because I think I know someone that is identified with every other number except for a 3. And so I don't know them a whole lot, know a whole lot about them personally, but they are also a lot like achievers, but it's less an internal motivation from my understanding, an internal critic, but more of external indicators of success. 4s are called the romantics or the creatives. They are oftentimes drawn to the careers of artistic expression. If it's music or artistry or poetry, they really like creative expression and are often called the romantics. So they're also part of the heart triad. Authenticity is like the number one value to a 4, which is a little bit of why, just knowing about the types, I thought potentially this was where you were typed, but it's actually where you go in security. So when things are good, you go to a place of authenticity and artistic expression. And so that probably makes a lot of sense.
I only write on my blog when I'm in a good place.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a really great indicator, right? Of that 2 going to security. You are taking on the positive or the average or positive aspects of the 4 type, the romantic. So the other thing about the 4 type that's talked a lot about is that fundamentally they think there's like a hole in their life, like there's something that's missing, that they just can't seem to fill that need. They like to be seen as unique. They don't like to be put in boxes, which is kind of like a joke about the 4s, right? Is that all the 4s are in this one box, but they don't like to be put in boxes, right? And so that's kind of the 4, the romantic, the creative, yes. So the 5 is the observer, the investigator, quiet specialist is the term that's used in that report. But they're driven a lot by almost a scarcity mindset. So I know quite a bit about 5s because for a while I was mistyped as a 5. So they are driven by a scarcity mindset. So they believe they have a limited amount of resources. So they are driven to acquire more and more knowledge all the time. So they want to know more, they want to investigate more, observe more, but also tend to be a lot more introverted because they believe their energy is very limited. So they get depleted very easily. They're very introverts. They spend a lot of time alone, which is where my type goes to in stress. So my 8, my core type that I've claimed, not my mistype, goes to that under stress. And you can tell. You've seen me in stress. Yep. I won't take out my earbuds at work because I'm totally secluded as much as I can be in our open space floor plan. So they like to be very independent. Because and they're oftentimes very emotionally detached from their surroundings. They're very central in the thinking center, and their second center is the gut center, so they're most removed from their heart, which is also very similar, kind of similar to my core type of an 8, as we talked about last time. But yeah, that's kind of the observer investigator. There tend to be not a lot of 5s in the world. The most common type is a 6, which we'll get to and probably makes a little bit of sense. But they say, I don't even know, it was like more than half of the population is a 6, is what I've read in some places. But the 6 are the loyalists. So they really like to feel secure and confident about what's going on because they have a lot of anxiety and fear naturally. They sit in anxiety, sit in fear a lot, and therefore are driven to try and always find a sense of security. So the loyalist is termed that because oftentimes in relationship, that is the number one pillar. Like there's always this idea that you might leave, I might feel unsecure, and so therefore I need to feel secure because of anxiety. There's oftentimes, when we talk about strengths, we talk about the commands who can get us out of a room in any given situation. The 6 is like that. So the 6 is always, especially like almost in a deliberative sense, looking for the issues. They're constantly being proactive about what could go wrong, right? To the place where in an unhealthy state, it could really drive someone into almost insanity, right? Because you're constantly anxious about things that might not ever happen, right? Like I have a friend who's a 6 and she talks about like plane crashes and, all these things that are like statistically not even realistic, right? But that's just where their brain goes. It goes to the worst case scenario and tries to settle there, and oftentimes can get stuck there. But it comes from a motivation of needing to feel secure, but it kind of often leads to anxiety. But it's kind of cool, again, from this book, Suzanne Stabile, The Road Between Us, she says they're a lot more concerned about the common good than any other number. So they are loyal, they are constantly there, they're steadfast, there's a faithfulness, because for them, that's what brings comfort, right? That's what brings security, which is what their motivation is for security, which can lead to a lot of anxiety. 7s are called the enthusiasts, oftentimes is what I've heard. Another term is epicures. They delight in the best possibilities, is what this book says. I know a few 7s, and they're best categorized as loving to avoid pain by filling it with fun things. So for example, the host of that podcast I mentioned, That Sounds Fun, she is a 7. So she made a podcast because it sounded like a fun thing.
Right.
And so she called it That Sounds Fun. So oftentimes they'll love to do things, love to go places, love to essentially numb pain as much as possible by doing things. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. They are naturally very positive people. They're always looking for the good that's going on around them, but a lot of it is with a motivation of trying to avoid any sort of pain. The 8s, which is my core number, are called the Challenger. I think is the only super positive, somewhat positive term I've heard for it. It's also called the Boss, or the Controller sometimes as well. So they are very independent and autonomous people, not liking to be dependent on anything or anyone. So very independent people. You're like laughing at me. Uh-huh. They are often motivated by the need to be against something. So there's always something fundamentally that 8s push against, either in the world or in their own life, or there's no place of contentment. And then the natural position is anger, sometimes frustration, loving to play devil's advocate, seeing both sides to any given situation. And so therefore, kind of in the best of all worlds, 8s can really bring a sense of justice. So justice is a big thing for a lot of 8s. So pushing against the injustices of the world is a really positive, healthy place for an 8 to be. But sometimes in unhealth, that can look a lot of just like picking fights wherever they find a fight, right? Okay. Did you have a question? You wrote down a question mark.
Keep going, and then I'll get to it.
Okay. So the last one, because we went in order, is a 9, which are the peacemakers, sometimes called the mediators. I've heard sometimes like harmonious attached to them. So they have the ability to see any, kind of put themselves in anybody's shoes, right? So they're very easily adaptive when it comes to their own personality. So they're talked about a lot in terms of they're the hardest to type because they conform to anybody that's around them. So they take on the characteristics of those people around them. I've also heard that in kind of unhealth, or I've read that kind of in unhealth, they can, because they are part of the gut triad, the 8, 9, and 1, which is naturally sits in anger, which is kind of funny. You might not think of them as angry, but it's a lot of latent anger and resentment that builds up. And so it then is expressed as passive aggressive, which is kind of really funny because, if you were to pick a theme, a strengths finder theme that goes with all of these, right? There are some that are really easy to pick, right? That would go really well with certain ones. Like, so for the 8, for example, harmony is one that probably could get easily attached to this. And we talk a lot about the basement, or the really, really raw form of harmony is passive aggression, because you don't want to deal with the conflict. And you think it's easier therefore to avoid the conflict, which, according to the Enneagram 9, is then builds up this latent anger and resentment. Which comes out probably negatively. So in the end, but okay, so that's an overview of all of the 9 types.
Okay, so remind me when So for me, 2 to 8, now that's when I'm in an unhealthy.
When you're in a healthy place.
I go to.
Oh, sorry, when you're in an unhealthy place, yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yep.
So when we were talking earlier about wounds, do you think that your unhealthy, the number that you go to when you're not in a good place, is related to your wound?
I don't know, honestly. I'm sure it is. I think this is the part of the Enneagram that I'm like, gosh, I feel like there's never consensus on anything, and everybody has a different way of explaining things, right? So you say your core type comes a lot from your childhood wound, or wounds that you either perceived or actually experienced growing up. And each core type has the exact same 2 lines of stress and security, or integration and disintegration. So I think surely it can come out of that, right? Like, I think of, you probably can have examples of yourself, but like my 8 goes to a 5 when it's in stress and in disintegration. And the 5 is this cold aloofness, which is my wound from my mom, right?
Right. So that's what I was thinking. I'm thinking, okay, because my 8, when I'm not in a good place, is active controller, which was a lot of, it was chaotic, and there was a total...
being the big sister.
Yes. Yep. That I have to go into control in order to survive, because that was completely lacking in our household.
Oh, absolutely.
So but then I think that's what I go to when I'm not in a good place, because it's what I know.
Yeah. Yep. And probably, naturally where you fall based on your core type, but also how your strengths align, right?
Right.
And so I think it's interesting, because what a lot of people talk about, like, you can't ever fully avoid stress in your life, or times of disintegration, hard times in your life. But knowing and identifying what are the triggers for that based on what you see as your motivation, right? So when you're starting to have this anger build up, when you're starting to want to punch a wall, right? Those are indicators that you're moving to an 8, which is very contrary to your natural stance as a 2, right? And so for me, when I start to retreat and withdraw and not want to go out with my friends and not want to verbally process what's going on, not want to do things, or to not want to put up a fight, I know that I'm retreating into a 5, which means I got to evaluate the stress that's going on in my life, right? And we talked about that in an earlier episode about your strengths, right? Like having really good identifiers for what your strengths look like in the basement, so that you can call that out in order to say what needs to change in this situation.
What will heal me? What do I need as a healing?
Yep.
And I think I also am curious as to, I know that when I'm in a good place, I go to a 4, right? Yes.
Yep.
And get to writing and blogging, but that's also my healing.
Yeah.
When I can be expressive, that's very healing for me. These dialogues are very healing for me. Now back to where you go in an unhealthy place. Am I saying that right? Is there a better term for it?
So
it's your basement, essentially.
Your basement, yep. So I think probably I've called it several different things on this. I think let's call them stress and security. When you're under stress, or when you're in a place of security. I think that's the easiest way to talk about them.
So when I'm in stress and I go to 8, so I was thinking of a recent conversation. I am going through a difficult time, and I was talking to my mom, who has known me, obviously, my entire life. And we don't always get along, and we have a very interesting relationship as it is. But one of the things that she said to me is, Allison, you always think that you can solve everything. And you insist on doing it yourself. And now... 5 years ago, 10 years ago, for sure 20 years ago, I would have completely dismissed her, because I'm not going to hear it. I will have nothing to do with that dialogue. You don't know me. And about the same time I took this, but also I was thinking about, she's right. She's right. Yeah. That I do think that I can control and fix and solve anything. Any problem is potentially a solvable issue.
Yeah.
And she said, and not everything is.
Yeah.
And not everything you have to do by yourself. So what I was thinking about is, she's really describing my in-stress 8.
Yeah.
Very, very well.
Yeah. Yep. And coming from, I think, probably the core motivation of the 2, right? Which is the need to help and to fix and to solve the problems. And then that 8 of having the full control over the solution of the problems, right? Because I think a 2, from my understanding, in a place of of health in a core 2 probably doesn't always need to have control over being the fixer.
No.
You like to identify the problems and you like to help people fix, right?
Right.
But you don't need to be...
I just love to witness growth. You just
love to see that happen, right? So like me, I'm like, I love to see it happen and let's go together. Like, let's walk hand in hand.
I just like to witness growth. And I like to feel like I'm part of something that matters.
I love it. Okay, so I'm going to read some stuff about the 2.
All right.
And we're going to do some strength spotting in the midst.
Okay.
Strengths connection. Okay. So Enneagram 2, the helper, you are demonstrative. You have a demonstrative and warm nature, which makes it easy for others to connect with you and like you. Okay. You're caring, anticipate the needs of others, and generally give of yourself to others. Focus on relationships. You excel in roles where engaging with clients and people really matters. Sacrificing, putting your own needs and feelings on the back burner to support others. And praising. You're good at paying compliments, and you can make people feel special, boosting their confidence.
I love doing that.
Yeah. Your motivation is the need to be liked and appreciated. It's a lot of your core motivation.
Yeah.
Which is probably hard to confront.
Right.
Empathy is likely very well developed. Literally, that's written in here. You have a feeling and emotion focused. You're into developing relationships with other people. You have a number of deep friendships and connection. You draw people out through your expression of generosity. You quickly respond when someone's in need. You like to express your appreciation for others in your own way. So like all of those things, I mean, is very much, I see your woo there. I definitely, your empathy, I want to spot your individualization too. The helper, I feel like really understands and really knows what people need. And so therefore, probably the 2 is a natural great gift giver as well. Like I showed up on Monday and there were 3 Beatles records on my desk. What the heck? And after sitting with that for a second, thinking, who on earth? Surely Allie, that's the easiest answer. But maybe it might be, Keith just came and, these other people. I'm
Why
like,
is she working on the weekend?
Then I finally texted you and I was like, oh yeah, it's for sure Allie. So, I was kind of surprised you even have Beatles records, honestly. But then you told me they're from Dan.
They're from Dan. They're from Dan.
So, so definitely a lot of the strengths playing out, which is funny when you think about, again, the difference between these 2. The Enneagram being about identifying your motivation and your talents, your talent themes from Gallup being about identifying talent and the manifestation of behavior, right? Your actual behavior, right? So if you're coming from a core motivation of needing to feel liked and appreciated, it's going to manifest in a way that's warm, that's people-oriented, that's sometimes people-pleasing, that's focused on others rather than the self. So it makes sense that these 2 would go hand in hand, right?
Right.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
So get into the not so positive language, because that's what I think is very unique about this assessment.
Yeah. So there's a ton of negative language, which is really, I think, hard, and which is why also we just don't recommend this in mass.
It's harsh.
It's very harsh. Very.
A reminder.
Outright.
Yeah, it's a reminder of. I feel like where your best also makes you weak.
Yeah. So I think this is the thing about the 2, right? Is that you are so in tune with other people's needs that you neglect your own needs. And I think yours is probably the least harsh language out of anybody. So when we get into mine, if you want to get into harsh language, let's go, because it's really bad. It's really bad. But okay, so I love some of these things, and I'm reading this from the Enneagram Integrative Solutions, the EIQ9 report, which I had Allie take. Again, if you listen back to episode 1, because I talk about the difference, really an assessment, even something like this that seems to have a little bit of validity, isn't generally a best practice. But it was easy based on our current context of conference being a week away. But some of the blind spots, you're not tuned into your own needs. You can neglect that, and you can neglect your own authentic desires. This says you may not be aware of the hidden intentions behind your generosity. So understanding that the motivation is to feel needed and to feel liked and appreciated. And that is, even though your behavior might seem very selfless, that's a very selfish motivation. Yeah. And so therefore, the vice of a 2, right? Each type has a vice and a virtue. The vice is pride, because it's pride through false humility, which is not humility, right?
Right.
And so it's a self-deprecation, maybe a self-lowering, a self-forgetfulness for the sake of inflating other people, which in the end is no closer to humility than full-blown pride is, right? And that's why I kind of like that it's called out as pride. But the gifts you bring to the world are compassion, love, and humility when you're in a really healthy place. Core fear is being unwanted, unloved, rejected, abandoned, seen as worthless or undeserved, which is hard, right? So when we talk about the triads, the head, the heart, and
I hope my wonderful therapist Tim is listening in
to that.
because he does an exercise with all of his clients, and I would really encourage people to do it. Yeah. What is your core fear?
Yeah.
And my core fear is abandonment.
Abandonment. Okay, so each type has a core fear.
Yep.
And they actually follow along another triad. So your core fear and my core fear are the same. Rejection. And makes a lot of sense when you dig into those things.
Yeah, it does.
And yeah, so I think that this is what I find kind of helpful about this sometimes, is you might not be able to put words to it. I could not put words to the fact that my core fear as a human being was rejection until I really did some intensive mentorship with one of the pastors when I was working with him. And, he really said, Tess, it sounds a lot like this anger or frustration is coming from a place of rejection. And until the word was put to it, I didn't know. And so that's what I love about strengths, but also why I think that the Enneagram can be helpful, is it puts words to our innate feelings, behaviors, actions, motivations, that if we aren't self-aware, and I don't think a lot of people are, it's never explicitly expressed, right? Like, it's really nice to have this typed out on a paper, as harsh as it is sometimes, because you can confront it, right? You can't.
I also have to own it.
You can't work through what is not identified, right?
So, interestingly enough, that both of us have that. Do you feel like that's part of our why? Because I know that's my why.
Yeah,
I don't want one single kid to ever feel
that's good
rejected or abandoned.
Yep.
That they.
Yeah.
I mean,
so
that's where my passion about zero visits gets, where I could punch my hand through a wall. There should not be any one of our kids ever not having that mentor show up for them, because if they get that promise, it should be kept. So do you feel like that's kind of where?
Probably. I think probably your why comes more out of your motivation, I would say. At least I would think, rather than like a vice. But I think a lot of our motivations come from, again, our childhood wounds, are things that we interpreted when we were growing up and forming. And that's where a lot of our, vices come from, a lot of the things about our core values, or our core numbers. So I think they all work together really seamlessly. So yeah, I think your why can come from any of that.
So this is a good second level when you're really getting deep into what's your why.
Yeah. Definitely. So I think a few other things about Ennea 2. You can quickly establish intimacy with people. Others are naturally drawn to you. In intimate relationships, like in partnerships and marriage, you spend a lot of time and effort pleasing, supporting partner. So you're good at adapting. You're pleasing to others and will find safety in pleasing authority within relationship. You have a natural empathy. You find yourself getting very involved in the management of other people's lives. So what I loved is when seeing this, which again, if you listen to episode 1, I don't know that I would have off the bat pegged you as a 2, right? Because, again, it has to do with your motivations. And I feel like you pretty well. But once I read this and understand your framework, it makes a whole lot of sense. The thought about learning to mom by not momming.
Yes.
I think that we talked about a few episodes ago.
Yes.
Was the thing I thought of immediately, right? Is that you're struggling with learning how to be a mom in this season of motherhood because your kids don't need you anymore.
Also because I have been in a mom role since I've been very young.
5. Yeah.
So I don't really know what it's like to not
And
parent.
That's also why the 2 makes total sense, because of the childhood wounds that you've walked through.
Correct.
And it makes, so much sense. So you may be quite adept at putting on a happy face. or stepping into helping mode, even when you feel unhappy or lack the motivation to give more of yourself to others. And I think that's something that you have really worked on, an authenticity in your self-expression, because I think that's a natural tendency of woo. And we've talked about that. It's a label of woo, but it comes from a place of, because that kind of happens sometimes, of the needing to be quote unquote on.
Which is exactly the phrase that I have used quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I think that came from early childhood experiences, that if I wanted to fit in and be accepted, I better be on.
Yeah.
And so there really isn't an option for me to be off. So going through a tough time and going into whatever situation I might be, I'm more apt to be even more on.
Yeah. Like hyper on.
Completely on. Yeah. And I will work to make sure that I can be on. But again, wise words of a therapist, he said, eventually you're coming down.
Yeah.
And,
for sure.
And for me, and I love that you point that out, because I think for everyone to go into the basement of their strength, the self-awareness of their personality, we are not constant rainbow and butterfly around here. No. And I think this is a deeper dive into, okay, what are my blind spots? What are my core fears? What are some of these things that, if I can know these and own these, it helps me to utilize my strengths as tools and superpowers to help me to be my most successful self.
Absolutely.
It does not mean that I'm not going to have times of stress and strain in this, but knowing my strengths, I know that, okay, every night I spend a little bit of time on Pinterest. Now I limit myself, but it brings me tremendous relaxation. And I'm going to pin a bunch of recipes I will probably never, ever cook, but it gives me this opportunity to let my Pinterest brain, my input brain, gather information.
Yeah.
Now, I've learned that about myself. So I think all of us need to know what are our little, and I'm not going to, self-care is getting completely overused as a term, but what do you need to be at your best in a horrible situation that's stressful? In the moment, or what's your ritual that you need at the end of the day?
What heals you? I mean, I love that question that you brought up a few episodes ago when we talked about that.
Right, and what heals you in the moment when you're angry and you're in a meeting? My friend Cassie talks about she envisions herself as rising above and witnessing it as if she was a fly on the ceiling. Literally, she's flying above, and when there's something very intense, and she has some intense meetings.
Yeah.
And in a board meeting that's intense, she can take herself out. She has learned that to be a healing tool.
That's awesome.
Now, for me, mine is probably, I don't have as much skill in the moment as I do in the every morning I have ritual.
Yeah.
So that it gets me started in a way that can motivate me for a better day.
Yeah.
And other people may have things that they do at the end of the week, or things that they do intrinsically. Yeah. But when we can identify those, they're going to help us, and they're going to be completely different for every single person.
Yeah. And I think that's cool, because I mean, what I was thinking of when we were talking about this, like putting on a face or being on, quote unquote, is that when you are in a place of health and a place of security, to use that term, you take on the tendencies of a 4, which is epitomized by authenticity. Right? This like hopeless romantic that is very in touch with the artistic expression and creativity. And so I think it's so interesting to think about that your natural tendency might be to put on a face or be on, but when you're in a place of health, it means you're in a place of authenticity. Right? Which is your value. Your core value. When we did the exercise, that was your number one core value, was authenticity. So
cool. And active controller for me is being on when things are a mess.
Ooh, yeah.
Because it's self-control.
Yep. Okay. Interesting. Ooh. Okay. Cool. Alrighty. Other strengths that you spot in this, or do you want me to start diving into the
Let's take on 8.
Let's take on the 8. Okay.
And so I'm going to just commend you for being as brave, because, I mean, here's some words that are in here. Enthusiastic, that's a nice one. Adaptive, considerate, creative, helper, and then it's active controller.
Which is this term, which I've never heard this term before I took this. So it's the most common I hear is the challenger. Forces of nature, strong presence, values being in control, guarded but caring and protective of those around them. They mask vulnerability with a tough, no-nonsense exterior. They may seem intimidating and confrontational. At higher integration, so in more security or more health, they combine their directness with compassion, which is that drawing the characteristics of the two out, collaborating with others while serving the greater good. That was all from my Enneagram, Integrative Enneagram Solutions E9 report. So some of the things also that I'll read from there, like I did the 2, confident and direct. You're comfortable saying what you need to say and you get on with things. Trust your gut, quick to respond, willing to make decisions and move forward. Big-hearted and protective of the people and the things that you care about, fighting against injustice. Autonomy is important, self-sufficient and dislike being dependent on others. You have your own way of taking charge and influencing others and the bigger organization. So the motivational need is to be strong and avoid vulnerability. You value having control, love challenges. At your best, you're empowering and encouraging. At your worst, you are domineering, aggressive, and unstoppable. This stems from the strategy to express yourself as larger than life in a threatening world. So that's fun. So I have been labeled aggressive in the past. That is a label I've gotten from a very young age. I have always, 8s tend to naturally assume leadership. I've always been a leader. Always been, 8s, a lot of 1s tend to assume leadership, the perfectionists. But I've always, student council president to NHS president to whatever it is, that tend to have the ability to take control really easily. I've gotten, the word aggressive, which has been hard. I don't know that I've ever been called domineering, probably not in my face, but probably behind my back. I think so. This is hard because this is the report we're reading from is, the IEQ 9, but I originally took it from the Enneagram Institute, which is a little bit cheaper, quicker, but doesn't have as much validity behind it. And the Enneagram Institute has a ton of resources on their website, but it talks about in total health, like in almost like full shalom of the person, like full wholeness. This is what the person looks like. And then like in full unhealth, and full unhealth for the 8 is sociopathy. It's complete control and manipulation of everything. So much so that you're not at all in touch with emotions. You have no empathy, right? Like that's, psychopathy, defined at its finest. Or, and so just like, it's very harsh. Like I feel like it's bad, but.
Okay, now I want to say a few things about this. As you were reading that, I'm thinking about, this is me in my 2.
Strengths-based mindset.
Okay, so when I'm thinking of you, I think of you as, I would prefer, I don't necessarily like questioner. Challenger is okay, yeah. Questioner. But what I'm thinking is you're really thoughtful about the learning. And so when you are questioning, you're questioning for the sake of learning.
Yeah.
And you're questioning for the sake of there could be something that we should discover here that you haven't thought about.
Yeah. Or a way to make us better, right? That's right. In a sense my, and I talk about it with context to my number 1 strength of context, loving to have all of the background and information, like all of the history.
Right.
And so therefore I feel like I question everything a lot.
Right.
And I feel like some people really don't like that because they interpret that as questioning their authority or their leadership or questioning their decisions. When in reality, it's coming from a place of, once you give me all the information, I am 100% on board, like more than 100%. I'll be your most loyal advocate, right? And that's the point of the challenger, too, the 8, right. Is I will be your fiercest champion.
But don't you dare veil it.
Don't you dare cross me.
Don't you dare veil the information.
Yeah. Oh, leave it out. Oh, absolutely. Yep. Don't you dare leave out information because automatically then you've crossed a boundary.
Right.
And there's like no turning back from
that. But also
point.
because it limits your discovery.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking about your questioning is for the sake of learning, which honors your learner. Your individualization is part of this too. What you just described is your individualization as well. In an independent, no, I hear you, but hear me.
Yep.
And then okay, justice.
Yeah.
And when I think about how you light up around the rights and honoring those in the prison population.
Yeah.
I mean, justice, your individualization, the way you are fiercely independent. Mm-hmm. And you have a lot of pride in being fiercely independent.
Oh, I love it. Oh,
so
absolutely.
I think fiercely independent would be a better way than saying active controller.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think also at the same time, you're questioning because you do care.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, in the end, and I think that's where the Enneagram can sometimes be a bit reductive, or maybe I'm in more of a healthier form of the 8. I guess I don't know, where a lot of my strengths, I have a lot of relationship building strengths, but sometimes those don't come out because my strategic thinking comes out. But I think a lot of my thinking themes are driven by relationships. So therefore it looks a lot like an 8, right? Like I'm thinking critically about the systems of injustice in the world for the sake of that one person I met who fell through the Medicare gap, right?
Individualization.
Yeah.
So then I also think about how just in our last, not the one right before this, but the previous episode when we were talking about aging, you push me.
Yeah.
You question me. And I think I said, "Oh, Tess, you challenge me."
Yeah,
like 3
you did.
times.
Yeah.
Because, and we can have spirited dialogue, but you can hear it when we disagree.
Yeah. Okay, and that's what, it was so funny because you texted me after and you said, I think this is my favorite episode because we agreed. And I said, yes, gosh, it was so much fun. Because I love to have disagreements with people. And I think that's the thing where, especially even maybe from your context, I'm thinking of my friend Alex, who's a 2, and your 2s might look a little different. I don't think she's a social 2, but so your 2s might manifest a bit differently, or but she thinks of the challenge, the arguments, as destructive to relationship. My arguments are constructive to relationship because I'm pushing the boundaries of trust.
Right.
If you're willing to engage with me, like, let's go on this aging thing, right? I have more trust with you because of that. Because if you start backing down, I then see you as weak. Not strong, right? As weak.
You can say weak.
I can say weak,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And not that, like, I don't see her as that. She's pushed back on me enough, but but her interpretation of the pushing is like, we're fracturing relationship, right? Our friendship is getting less.
And you're pushing because that's where the learning is.
I'm pushing because the learning's there. I'm pushing because I want you to stand up and be your own advocate and stand up and champion the causes, right?
Right.
Like, it frustrates me so much when people get pushed over, right? Which is such an 8, right? Of like strength and assertiveness and core fear being helplessness and vulnerability. And I wish everybody had the freedom to voice what they viewed at any given time. Because I feel like I just do that. And not everybody does that, right? They have things that tamper that. So, I don't know. I love, like, when, at some point, and I think I talked about this on the last or the aging episode. So, I don't know if I'll ever get married or have kids. But, like, when people ask me, like, what would you want in a spouse? I want someone who will fight battles. Like, who would push up against me, who has very strong views, because and it's totally as an 8 now that I'm processing it. Like, weak people are the people I need to protect, right? They're not the people I can walk along life side by side with.
It's also where you are fueled with intellectual conversations.
Absolutely.
And there's no intellectual conversation if someone just says, you're right, I agree.
Mm-hmm. Oh, those
there's
conversations,
no
I love those kinds of conversations.
Yes, there's not, if you don't have that, you're lacking depth.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So blind spots, for me, you may not realize how intimidating you are to others. So that's something that, until someone voiced that for the first time, I did not realize that I have been called intimidating. So I think that was something until it was told to me, like, oh, the first time I met you, just kind of a funny thing. Oh, you were kind of intimidating. You were, like, strong-willed and very confident, and I didn't know how to talk to you. Like, I've heard those things before. Like, now that I'm, like, friends with people who are like, oh, yeah, what was your first impression of me? That always seems to be people's first impression of me. And so that, I think, is a blind spot that I think now that it's been voiced, I'm more aware of, right? Which is kind of some of the benefit of this work, is knowing that that's how the world perceives me and can see me. And so therefore, maybe I should approach new situations in a little bit of a different way.
So would you rather have that feedback by reading something like this or by being told by someone?
By reading. For me, by reading. Absolutely.
Agreed.
Yep. Because then, I'm worried about the relationship, right? Like, is my friendship with this person, it has a whole different framework and context, right? It shifts it if that was their first perception of me, right? And I think it's part of the 8, I don't think we've said this word yet, but I think the controller, the challenger, there's a lot of power at play. Like, I tend to assume power vacuums naturally. Like, I try not to, I don't intend to, but like the meeting we had, the all-staff meeting, nobody was dialing in, so I went and dialed into the call, right? There are 3 people who technically have seniority over me in that situation, right, in that room, but like it was there, nobody was doing it, I assume power vacuum, right? And I think that's a natural part that I've really had to temper, not necessarily, especially like within teammates. Like, I function very autonomously. I'm on a team. I love my manager. Like, she's awesome, but gives me a lot of autonomy. And so I've had to be like, okay, I'm not on leadership team. I'm not necessarily in a formal status leadership role. So I have to be very aware of where I might have an urge to step into a more powerful place in a conversation or in a meeting and say, okay, is this the right context and framework for this? You're like, yes.
Well, I think it's good to have that.
Yeah.
That the ability to step back and say, just like we talk about with strengths, reading that definition, highlighting the words and phrases, but then turning it over to someone else and saying, how do I show this in real life? Because what we see in the mirror is often very different. So when I was reading that, and you called out about the, not in a non-mom role now, my kids have gently and not so gently told me that.
Yeah.
But reading that, I went,
there we go.
Okay.
Yep.
But I've also been writing about it, talking about it, being open about it, that I think because we get to do this, I'm able to do more of that self-discovery, and I'm able to be more aware. Because you don't have a problem calling me out. We have that kind of trust between the two of us that you can say, wow, okay, what's happening here? And we can talk about this. So the second part of this that I think is key is having the right support circle to dive into this.
Absolutely.
So I would not encourage someone to just take off on this and not have any kind of like connection, a real friendship, a real trust with someone that you can say, help me with this. Because I think you can get stuck on the harsh language.
Oh, absolutely. And it can become very self-deprecating. And that's why I mentioned that I think that, I wouldn't broadly with a brushstroke say everybody needs to do this or everybody needs to know this. But if you're doing some intense self-work, right, in the context of therapy or counseling, in the context of friendships or a community group or a small group, like this could be very helpful, right? Not ever something I would do with my mentee, not ever something that I would do, would ask a coworker what their type is, right? Like not ever something I would apply, but like it's made me approach my mentoring relationship differently, knowing that I am the adult, and especially as an 8, I naturally assume power. How can I let my mentee teach me, right? It isn't me trying to put this framework on her. It's me having greater self-awareness, self-compassion, and self-realization that I know what my natural tendencies are.
Your fault lines.
My fault lines, my blind spots. So therefore I can avoid them. Okay, so there's lots of other super harsh language around the 8, but I feel like we got like real well into it. Lots on control and power and So one of my favorite things though, in a really good place, a term that I have found that I will forever champion is revolutionary activism.
Of course you are.
I loved that phrase and I circled it about 12 times on my sheet because I just am... I love it because, I don't know, it just feels like there are so many systems that I'm a part of that I aim to change. I aim to push against, to make them better, right? Not for the sake of creating waves, right? Or disrupting the status quo for the sake of doing that, right? It's for the sake of making the world a better place, right?
And so I hope people who are listening who maybe don't understand someone else or they don't understand the motivations of why would someone march? Why would someone protest? Why would someone step up and say, I disagree? Mm-hmm. If you could step back and understand that it may be because they truly want to make the world a better place, and that's what this can look like. Yeah. I mean, again, it brings us back to self-awareness, but the more we become self-aware, the more opportunities we have to honor other people and understand that we are all very unique and different. I was thinking about, revolutionary activist is so you, but also there's just a little tiny hint of context in there, just the way you say revolution. It's like you love that word. But I was thinking about that's you. Now, I would rather hear that than active controller. Yeah. So too bad they didn't discuss with us.
Yeah, so, with us.
The best terminology would be.
But, okay, so I have to laugh because some of these weaknesses that were listed, one of them I highlighted and circled, and I was like, oh, I wonder what this says, because I was digging into your report. I really didn't reread my highlights, but when people don't keep you informed or feed you ambiguous information, you may find yourself interpreting this as a breaking of trust. Which is exactly what you said.
Don't you dare veil. Don't you dare veil anything.
Oh, yeah. You give me information without showing me the raw data. I am like, this is BS, right? Like, I'm like, I will rerun this myself, and we will see if our numbers hold up. So I question everything, but, yep. So.
One of the things I wanted to encourage us to do, I've been reignited around one word. Mm-hmm. So as we close. So when you close a meeting, when you close a conversation, when you are separating the end of this part of the day. Yep. One word. Yep. So I think we should start integrating that into Genn and Millie as a great example to mentors and mentees on how to close out their meeting time. Mm-hmm. Give some focus, give some takeaway. Yep. But one word.
You go first. You've had more time to think about this.
Discovery.
Mm-hmm. You're gonna laugh because mine, first one that came to my word was defense. Because, and I think we're just supposed to end with the word, not give context to it, right? I also want to give context.
Darn, I think you were gonna say revolution or something. Okay.
Well, revolutionary activism hyphenated, obviously, but
defense.
Yeah, so defense. I feel like so I think I have struggled with how much I've really liked the framework of the Enneagram because I am such a strengths champion. And that has been hard for me. Like, I feel like there's been internal conflict of, like, I don't want to go out and advocate for everyone to take this. I don't think that this should be, even in the context of probably lots of teammates, people listening to this, like, I don't think this should be systemically implemented anywhere. But it has been really helpful for me in getting to a level of authenticity.
And I believe it's just a perfect example of your 8.
The fact that we're internal conflict.
And the fact that we're having a dialogue about it.
Yeah. Sure, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And this is the kind of assessment that really feeds your strengths.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And I think...
Which is funny. Yeah, that's kind of funny.
I think strengths is really an assessment that feeds my strengths.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it...
Yeah.
Also, we can agree on... Yeah. This would not be something that we would encourage, but we can sit here and have dialogue about it.
Have discussion about it, yes, which I like. And I will never, ever forsake strengths. Like, that's just who I am and how I'm wired.
You might teach an Enneagram class.
But I think there's been so much benefit for me to do them in tandem because they serve 2 different purposes and they can work really well together, I think. But again, I think you're so right that in order to engage in this really well, I think you have to have people around you. Mm-hmm. Like, I wouldn't be here if all of my friends all of a sudden didn't want to know all about this, right? Like, when I took the workshop, I was the only one in my friend group that really knew about it. And at that time, I was still identifying like as a 5. I wasn't even, identifying as my true core type. I hadn't really gone through the full typing process. So, yeah, so I think, but now in the last probably 6, 7, 8 months, all of my friends have known their type, and it's become part of our language. Like, there are, which I don't know how much I really like these, but there are lots of like Instagram people who will like put memes out there and say, this is a whatever wing, whatever, right? And so there's this one that is really funny, and she has really great content, and so I follow her, but Enneagram and Coffee is her name or her like Instagram handle, but she does these things where it's like, this situation, how each type would respond. And so one of them was like a plane crash on a desert island. And my 2 closest friends are a 2, a 6, and I'm an 8. And so the 2 was making sure everybody has food, right? Everybody has their basic needs covered.
Right.
The 6 was, I have planned for this my whole life and I have risen to be our leader. It was literally what it said.
I knew it.
Right? Like the 6 is like, told ya, right? And then the 8 was like, has assumed power, right? Like is able to take charge and make sure all the shelter or something like that. It was something like that. But it's just interesting because yeah, everybody approaches situations differently. It's a strengths mindset too. It's like when you recognize that someone is coming to this situation with different intentions, motivations, and natural behavior, you're going to have more compassion towards them, more empathy towards them. Right. Because you and I might do a similar behavior, like I mentioned. We might be doing something very similarly, but we're coming from 2 different places. And so it helps fill the gap between us with trust rather than suspicion in the end. So,
and I am grateful that you had me take it. I mean, I'm on a new path for myself, and I think this is a good time for me to do self-reflection on some areas that maybe I don't always see and I don't always think about. So on that note, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
I'm glad. Well, this is definitely, we're in a good long episode. So I'm so glad we divided this into 2 parts. That was a really good idea. But anyway, so we're just thankful you tuned in. Like we mentioned, this is a different one where we probably won't post any action steps, but really just wanted to respond to some of the questions that we had, some of the very popularized notions of this. A lot of people wondering how these differ. What I find really interesting, a resource I want to point everyone to, is if you go to the Gallup coaching blog, it's coaching.gallup.com, and you actually can search for like the Enneagram and other assessments. I think is what it's called. And I think his name is Alan Hickman, and he's a learning consultant with Gallup, and he has compared and contrasted strengths with almost every other personality assessment that's out there. Like, how are they different? How are they similar? And there is one on the strengths in the Enneagram, which is interesting because, it comes from a very strengths-based mindset. So some of the things I'm like, oh, I'm not sure, and that's also like my 8. That's like, I don't really trust this because what is your background in researching this, right? I've spent, which is right, so funny. Like, okay. But it's very interesting because I think this is just one case scenario of this. We'll probably not do any of the other ones because neither of us really have invested in the other any other personality assessments. But just I think interesting to see how there are so many random measures of personality, right? You can take a BuzzFeed quiz and figure out what flavor of ice cream you are, right?
Right.
And I think there are certain ones that hold a lot more validity than others. But I think in the end, the quest for self-knowledge and self-development, personal growth, from a point of loving people better, being a better participant and human in the world, no matter what expression that is valid, right? I think I have a very, universalistic approach to personal development. Mm-hmm. I personally champion strengths because I find it the most valid and reputable and the most well-researched and the most well-backed. But I think any time and effort that you invest in your own personal growth is worthwhile.
Absolutely.
Right? Especially when it's from the purpose of, I want to be a better human in this earth. Yeah.
And I think on that note of validity, it's important for our listeners to know that their voice is heard. Yeah. So when people say, I wish you would cover this, I would like for you to talk about this, when are you going to talk about this on Genn and Millie? We take that seriously.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's important to know, that it gives our time here gives voice to other voices, and then allowing other people to be heard.
Absolutely.
So send us your recommendations on topics that you'd like us to talk about. We'll be getting back together after conference.
Yeah. Because none of us have any free time between now and then.
Right. And I think you'll just even hear a different tone in our voices. It doesn't sound like
stress and sleep deprivation.
That's right.
Alrighty. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in to episode 47, part 2 of Genn and Millie. If you enjoyed today's conversation, the part 1 and part 2, consider sharing this episode with a friend, or just engage in dialogue. If you're interested or you have experience with the Enneagram and strengths, shoot us a message and let us know. Like, I'd love to hear how you feel like your strengths contribute or impact your Enneagram type, your core type. We'd love to hear some of that information. But yeah, probably probably won't be referencing a whole lot of this in future conversations since we are so strengths-based. But yeah, feel free to interact with us regarding your responses to this episode. We'd love to hear what you thought. And to interact with us and share any feedback you have for us, along with any other proposed topics you would like us to cover on the podcast, feel free to reach out to us. The best way to contact us is by following us on Instagram at Genn and Millie. That's at GennandMillie. Until next time.